Do life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about Thy Kingdom Come. Appalachian Liturgy.
Okay, welcome everyone to the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy,
And I'm Justin Bowling.
and tonight we have a good friend and reoccurring guest of the podcast, Pastor Nate Thomas. Nate, thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. He has taken the place of Brooke tonight. Brooke, unfortunately, she is out with Hudson being sick, and so prayers for Hudson that he recovers soon and everything like that. But yeah, Nate, thank you for the quick notice. We didn't give you much of a notice on this, but
It's all right.
Wasn't there a talk show back in the 80s or 90s that if you return as a guest like 4 or 5 times, you get a jacket or something like that? Or was it SNL or something?
Saturday Night Live, it's the Five Timers Club.
Yeah,
Oh, there you go.
I think you're about
Do
there,
more,
Nate.
and I'm going to be expecting my jacket.
all right, I will have to see if we can get a jacket made. Although you and Dustin Keith are in a competition, I've heard, as what Dustin said. So
Apparently we are.
you're winning.
Well, the sad thing is I've only met Dustin once. I like him, but we've never been in the
Right.
same place.
Yeah.
Never seen you at the same place at the same time? Are we sure we don't already have 5 clubs? Just under different aliases?
That's right.
No,
That's
he's
right.
apparently much younger than me. So
That's right. Okay, good stuff. Well, tonight we are going to talk about Mr. Rogers. And I think, Bowling, you mentioned that it was, World Kindness Day last week sometime?
Yeah, I believe so. It was World Cardigan Day and World Kindness Day, I think.
They coupled it together, Kindness Cardigan Day. And I knew that Cardigan Day was in November sometime. I just wasn't sure. It started a couple years ago, I think. And that was also when, I believe, Won't You Be My Neighbor documentary debuted a couple years ago. Yeah. So I guess it's a tradition now. It's sort of Mr. Rogers Day in November. So we wanted to tackle that this week. So I guess let's get started. Where do we want to start? I mean, he is something else. Like I said in the previous podcast, in my mind, he's a saint. Like if anybody is a saint, he's a saint. So where do we want to get started with him?
Did you watch the show a lot as a kid? Did you grow up on it, or did you kind of get into Mr. Rogers more when you were older? I mean, I guess I can start with that, but yes, I definitely watched Mr. Rogers a ton growing up. It was probably one of my 2 watched shows, like for the first 5 to 10 years of my life. It was Mr. Rogers and David the Gnome were my 2 go-to shows, which aren't exactly the same, but definitely was a huge Mr. Rogers fan. Watched him all the time. I never really, imitated or wanted to dress up like Mr. Rogers or something, but in terms of imitating the way he acted, it's kind of hard not to want to do that even as a kid, because he kind of connects to you and is able to make you feel good about yourself no matter what situation you are in life. And I think that's kind of one of the attractive things about that as a show. It presents complex things in a simple way, and I guess that's why it stuck with me for a while.
I was going to say, I agree. Growing up, watching PBS, it was Sesame Street, The Electric Company, and Mr. Rogers. And my parents on the being very active parents, they were not worried about me watching that. When you're young, your parents kind of keep an eye on what you're doing, or they should. But Mr. Rogers was always it's a peaceful time. There's no action. Kids like bright colors and loud noises. Mr. Rogers was the kind of show you could just watch and feel like you knew who you were with. You knew him. He accepted you. And even as an adult, when we look back, or at least I did this today, you realize how he wanted to include people. I mean, I read stuff today I had never heard before, which I know we'll talk about regarding him, but just the impact he's made on generations cannot be overestimated.
Amen. Yeah, I grew up with him as well. I will say that I think my fandom of him more as a nostalgic a hero almost. That didn't really start until I was an adult, and I found out more about him and all this stuff. Now, as a kid, I did watch him, but I don't think it was my favorite show as a kid. Because it was more on the educational side, and as a kid, you don't always like that. But he is definitely one of my favorite, entertainers and favorite people of all time now, just because of how great of a person he was and how he really let his faith. And my cat is doing something. She's going to knock over some stuff here in a second. She's in the bag. You see it? She's getting ready to knock over something. But how he lived his faith through TV.
Right.
And it's amazing at the example he set for everyone, for kids and adults alike. So that's what I love about him.
Do you think there's a reason?
I have a prop.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, you have to see your prop.
So yeah, this is a Mr. Rogers Neighborhood board game, and I bought this a few years ago. And looking at the back, it's actually a card game. So it's like a set collecting game, to where you have all these characters and you collect sets of characters, and when you get like 5 sets or something, you win. So it's a very easy, it's kid friendly game, but that's primarily what that is. And Nate, I think you had a prop too, right?
Oh, I did. I collect those Funko Pop characters. I found Mr. Rogers a few months ago, and I told my buddy at the collectible shop, I said, save that one for me. I'm coming to get it. So he just threw it behind the counter, and waited on me. One of my favorites. I never would have looked for it, but one of my favorites that sits on my shelf at the house.
And he's holding the trolley. That's perfect.
Right.
I like it.
There's another one where he's holding King Friday, the puppet. But
nice. That's cool. Yeah, it's funny because I seen the day that they posted on Welcome Back Collectibles that figure. I seen that post and I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta have it. And then here's the first comment, Nate Thomas, save it for me. I'm like, dang it.
You're not the only one of my friends who's told me I need to leave his Facebook page alone. He has a lot of my money living in his shop.
That's right. That's right. It's a wonderful shop. Plug to Welcome Back Collectibles in Tazewell.
That's right.
That's a great shop.
I had meant to bring a collectible, but that kind of ties into the question I was about to ask. In that I was going to have my kids have these Daniel Tiger toys that are kind of like a continuation of Mr. Rogers type thing. It's like the next generation of Make Believe Land. But unfortunately, I can't find them, which is not surprising in this house. But I did want to ask, do you think because it feels like to me, I watched Mr. Rogers for like the first 10 years of my life or something like that. And then I honestly didn't think about him too much for decades. And then all of a sudden in the past few years, it's kind of like came back like a storm again.
It's because of merchandise.
There's a reason you think it's just merchandise?
Yeah, it is. I think it's a combination of merchandise and the movies and documentaries they're making, which ties into merchandise. It's the reason why they would want to do merchandise. Mm-hmm. And the only reason why this is taking place, and I mentioned this on the last podcast, is he's passed away, and I assume that his wife didn't have the sort of reservations that he had with merchandise and consumerism and things like that, because he never would allow this. And, I understand that. I kind of get, and I sympathize with that or empathize with that. But at the same time, I feel like his legacy and his message this is the way it has to spread. There's no better way for it to spread than merchandise at this point, because we're in a consumeristic society,
Right.
So yeah, I think it had to evolve.
Sorry. It's the same principle as the Muppets.
Mm-hmm.
The Muppets went from being everywhere to going away once Disney bought them. And they are still popular because of cartoons and all the stuff, the merchandise. You're right. That's how that stuff stays popular. It's across the board.
Yeah. But yeah, so I was doing some research today. I actually watched an episode earlier, and this is one of the things that I guess I know more now than I realized then, is the tough topics that he talked about on the show. Divorce being one of them. And it amazed me how he talked to kids, because he talked to kids as if they were adults. I mean, he didn't dumb things down. He just went into the topics. And and he asked them about their emotions. Like, does this make you sad? Does it make you mad? Does it make you angry? Like, he's just asking kids. I mean, it's just wonderful. So the episode I watched earlier was he was feeding his fish, and he goes to the fish tank, and one of his fish had died.
Oh,
So, and it's amazing because they show the dead fish on camera, and he says, have you ever lost a pet? And they have the whole episode on death. I'm like, oh my gosh! Like, I can't believe that this
That's
is a
the
kid's
episode you
show.
picked to watch.
That is the episode I picked to watch. Yes,
is
I
that
was
one
in a
where he
very
talks
good.
about his childhood dog at the end?
Yep, it is. He talks about losing his pet dog,
Mhm.
and even the neighborhood of make believe segment of the show was Trolley almost died in it. So, and they had to have a doctor come and repair him. So it was a lot of just somber, mundane things that kids have to go through, but that people don't want to talk about. Like, people want to shield kids from that. But guess what? Kids are going to have to go through that. I mean, everybody experiences death. So I just found it wonderful that was an episode, and I don't recall ever watching it. It was one from like the late 70s, early 80s. So I'd never watched it before. So I just found it great.
I looked
think
up.
one of the. Oh, go
Sorry.
ahead, Nate.
I could have waited. When I was reading about him today, and I looked up some clips on YouTube. I kept going back to Matthew chapter 7,
Mhm.
verse 12. I'm going to say, but don't quote me on that. But in Matthew 7, Jesus is doing the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
And he says, "By their fruits, you'll know them." Well, and I got to looking and reading about Mr. Rogers, and here's this guy, and I know we'll get into that. He was a Presbyterian minister.
Mhm.
He had delivered messages. He did not overtly talk about Christianity on his show, which I can respect, so he could reach a bigger audience. I can appreciate that. But his fruits were evident in the way
Yeah.
he impacted children. I mean, he was married to his wife for over 50 years, and people will testify. I was reading this today that he was religiously faithful to her, avoiding any appearance of any kind of misdeeds. And
Yep.
those are fruits. Shouldn't we all aim for that? Well, I'm a pastor by trade,
Mhm.
so I preach every Sunday, a couple of times every Sunday. Well, what if I didn't? Would my fruits, if there are fruits, and I pray there are,
Mhm.
would they be evident by my actions, my attitudes, the way I treat people? I'm not trying to preach to this audience, but would our fruits be evident like Mr. Rogers so clearly are?
Right.
I don't mean to take so long.
No,
No, absolutely
it's
not.
really
I think
good.
that's perfect. Yeah, and like you said, he on his show you don't hear him overtly preaching, but there's nobody that would question, his faith or anything like
Right.
that. It's very obvious that Christ is a huge part of his life. And similarly to you, I was reading a little bit about him earlier, and one thing that I hadn't read before was when he first got into television. I knew he had thought about going into seminary some beforehand, but one thing I didn't know was like why he decided to go into television, and it said because he did not like television and thought it was used for a lot of
Yes.
bad things.
Mhm.
And I was like, that's great, especially for the time like we're in now when. I think I rail on social media about every single podcast, but
You should.
like I feel like that's a similar situation to where we have this medium now that has a lot of very negative effects on society that we can very plainly see. And so I feel like we could have kind of our Mr. Rogers of social media that can show how, if somebody could be the Mr. Rogers of social media and show how we could kind of redeem that.
Yep.
And get the message of Christ across and get a positive message across rather than something that's so divisive as it is today.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when and I just read that too, that he actually did not like TV.
Right.
And
Yeah.
So being able to jump into something you don't like, that you despise maybe, and heal it, really. And that's kind of what he did. And I wouldn't say that he totally fixed it, but he at least gave an avenue for good in TV. And he even railed against, like I said, the consumerism part of it, which is part of what he hated. He hated the marketing part of TV. So one of the best things I think that he ever did was that going in front of Congress and
Yes.
that speech he gave to get funding for PBS, all the shows that's on PBS. That was amazing. And I mean, they went from not wanting to fund this thing to just giving him more than they asked for. Like here's all the money. Like you sold us. It's just amazing. It was great.
It's almost like he single-handedly saved public television.
Exactly.
That's the idea that you get. It's never overtly said, but he
Right.
was so well spoken and so deliberate with what he was saying to the Senate hearing. If I'm telling this right, the president at the time wanted to drop their funding from 20 million to nothing, and then came back with a $10 million offer. Mr. Rogers, he went before Congress, and at the end, the senator looks at him and he goes, "Well, I believe you've earned that $20 million."
Yeah, it went back to the original offer. Yeah,
that's. I don't want to use the word lightly. That's a miracle.
it is.
That's a miracle that you could visibly see.
Yeah, and getting Congress to agree is absolutely a
and to give more money.
Yeah. So one of the other things that I researched today was it's a lot of the topics that like I said, that he talked about was controversial for its day, and one specific instance was him doing really a feet washing in a swimming pool with the black cop, the officer Clemmons. Yeah. And I mean, it was deliberate because during this time you had the segregation of pools, right? And that was the hot topic thing of the day. So he deliberately did this. But I find it interesting that it was a feet washing, really, that he chose to do. So I feel like that was Christian symbolism that he pulled straight from Christianity, from his faith, to bring into TV. That you wouldn't specifically notice if you weren't, versed in Christian, beliefs.
He used the same towel. Mr. Rogers used the same towel on his feet as on the Clemmons' feet.
Yeah.
Because the guy's standing there and he says, "Well, I don't have a towel." And Mr. Rogers goes, "Well, you can use mine."
Yep.
You can use the same one I'm using. I forget. And you think in the time that aired,
yep,
even today in some circles, how controversial, how groundbreaking that would have been.
Yep. Yeah, I think that was in the 70s when he did that. So that would have been right. I mean, there was still a lot of segregated circles during the 70s. So, yeah, it's amazing. So I guess another fun fact about Officer Clemmons, he's actually gay. The person that played the character, yeah, he was gay. And this is one of the things that came out, I think, when they were doing the documentary a few years ago. And is that Officer Clemmons is gay. I mean, he's an activist now and everything. And that one of the things that Fred Rogers told him to do, or asked him to do, being a part of the staff, is to not publicly come out. And, there was a lot of outcry a few years ago about that, saying, Mr. Rogers is homophobe and all this stuff. But he, I'm trying to think of who the guy. I think it's Francisco Clemmons was his name. I believe it's his actual name. And he basically had an article about just questions and answers about Fred Rogers, and he talked all about that stuff. And he was, talking about how during that time there was nobody accepting really of gay people, and that it not only would have ruined his career, but it would have put a big burden on the show.
Right.
And that was exactly why Fred Rogers advised him. And he said in private, he even told him that, "Hey, I don't mind what you're doing. I don't mind your lifestyle. It doesn't bother me, but I have to look out for the show. I have to look out to keep us on air. And so please, if you're going to be a part of our staff, please just keep it private." And he did. He said that he loved Fred Rogers like a father. And so he kept it private. He said he felt it was a sacrifice that he could give. He said, for the greater good. And he was also religious too. They actually met in the Presbyterian church, Clemmons and Fred Rogers and his wife. So he was also religious too. So he felt that it was a calling on him to sacrifice that for the greater good of the ministry of Fred Rogers. And I was like, that is just an amazing story as well. But a lot of people wouldn't look at it that way. A lot of people would look at that Fred Rogers forced him to stay in the closet, and that was it would have been a horrible thing. But again, it's a different era. You got to look at the era it was in, and the culture just was not as near as accepting as it is now. And I think that Fred Rogers was just afraid of that. He did his best to stay squeaky clean and to not get in any trouble at all. And I think, Nate, you had mentioned that already. So I think he was just overly protective of the show, and you can understand that. But I know
you can see today too, like how anything that gets overly controversial just becomes like a lightning rod for anything in the culture war. Like it doesn't get to stand for itself, but it just gets hijacked and used by other people. And I mean, if there's a similar time to what we're in today, I feel like the late 60s around that time is probably pretty darn close. So yeah, I feel like it's probably similar there too, to where like he knew that if it became like, he's already maybe pushing some boundaries and stuff like that. But if it looks like he's like joining in the culture wars or whatever, it's just, that's all it's going to become. He's going to lose his message to only be available to a certain group of people, and he wants it to be for everybody.
Right. And his wife said as much. Like she said that if the show had been in a different time, had been going on now, that he would have definitely touched on these things, and it would have been much more accepted, and he wouldn't have tried to push back at all, because there wouldn't have been the potential of the economic blowback from taking that position. So, and again, a lot of this, he was a religious person during that time, and I would assume that most religious people during the 60s and 70s probably did not have a pro-LGBT view during that time. So, again, you're a product of your era that you grow up in. It's hard to get around that.
It's very difficult to judge. I'll even go as recent as 2010. It is difficult to judge the past by the present standards.
That's true.
We can, I don't want to get into the political or whatever, but it's easy to look back and say, well, how did we allow this to happen and to be accepted? We didn't. It's a product of the time. What you're saying, you can't judge the past by today.
Yeah. I mean, it in a sense, it should be difficult to do that. I think everyone does it, and it's easy to fall into that trap of judging, looking back and saying, "Oh, those were terrible people." How could Nazi Germany ever happen? But we were all fallen people here. We are all sinful people. We are all apt to fall into those temptations, given the circumstances that we're brought up in. So
I think there's a distinction, like, to be clear too, that I know you're not saying, but just in case, like, some people can hear it wrong, but like, you're not arguing for moral relativism, like that something that was wrong today was right then, type of thing, but more so like, I know you're not saying that, but I know some people can take it that way. But instead, it's more like what we see through the story of salvation, all through Scripture, that God will meet us where we're at and then work from us there. It's not that something was wrong, it's what right and wrong don't change, but more so that what God can work with in a certain state is where we are. That's where that's what we have.
I don't want to get complaints, so thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, trying to save those.
Bowling, you're the man.
I found kind of on a similar note too. I know one thing you hear people bring up a lot whenever something bad happens is his quote about, usually in terms of natural disasters or some kind of tragic event, that his quote about looking for the helpers, which is like always like a really encouraging thing. And I feel like that kind of fits with his general theme that we see a lot. The whole thing about, like, he thought television was bad, so he's going to go into this bad thing and bring something good out of it. And like same thing with a tragic event, he sees the helpers and brings something good out of it. Like, is that not the most central Christian theme that we see God doing all the time? So that he brings something good out of something bad. That's kind of the story of salvation summarized there. The fallen world, we get such a great a savior type thing. Yeah, the Felix culpa.
I agree.
Yeah, I think he used that, and that was I think something his mother told him, and he
Yep.
used that post 9/11, if I recall.
You're right.
Yeah, and the show had just ended in August 2001, and then he came back with just a special video after 9/11 with that because he felt like he had to say something to help heal the nation, and it was, again, that's Mr. Rogers for you.
I saw an interview. I looked up, I guess, just on YouTube as I was surfing around today, a clip of him with Charlie Rose. And Charlie Rose asked him how many children he thought he had reached during the course of his show. And this would have been, I guess, in the late 80s or mid 90s. I'm not sure of the date. And Mr. Rogers replied, and this is not an exact quote, this is just what I wrote down. Basically, I don't care how many, as long as there's one. And of course, I immediately wrote down, that's the gospel message, if there's just one. And I'm more and more impressed the more I read. I needed that today. So
yeah, that's a great message. And speaking of sheep, I read that on his deathbed, he actually asked his wife, "Am I a sheep?"
I saw that. Yeah.
And she said, "If anybody is, you are." And I just think it's amazing, and I think that it should hit home to all of us that as good as we can be, we think we are, that we can be, when we get to that time where we're ready to meet God, are we a sheep? That I think we're all going to ask that question. We all should be asking that question,
right.
Because, and ultimately, it's Jesus that is saving us. It's not these good deeds. It doesn't matter how good we were. I mean, we should be showing the fruits, as we said, but that's not what's saving us. It's Jesus Christ that's saving us. So, am I a sheep?
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I hadn't read that.
Yep.
But I am going to write it down.
I just thought, this is sermon stuff for you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'll give you guys credit when I steal any of it.
So
I did think, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
I did think this afternoon, when I was reading through and looking, I'm so tempted in January when we start our year at the church or some point, just the idea in the back of my mind is Mr. Rogers. Let's take a Sunday and no, you don't want to canonize Fred Rogers. You don't want to elevate him into an idol.
I want to canonize him as a saint at the very least.
That's fine. That's not a battle I'm willing to fight. But just say, if you want to talk about a servant, you want to talk about somebody putting their ego to the side, somebody who, the phrase, he put his money where his mouth was. There it is.
Yeah.
His reputation. And we talk a lot about integrity. Of course we all do. It has stuck in my head all day that there's a lot there to be mined from a modern day person that we can look to.
Yeah. And I love, I love the segments, the land of make believe, just promoting imagination. And he's still touching on the tough topics in that fantasy world, but just promoting imagination, I think, is something that we're losing in the modern age with technology and everything.
Right.
We need more imagination. And I also like how the transition, like you had the trolley going from inside the home to the land of make believe, and so there was this transition in the show. So I thought just a lot of aspects of the show that I'm noticing, it's very cool that he did. Well thought out.
And it's funny, the land of make believe is what the Daniel Tiger stuff comes from, and that reminded me when I started thinking of that. There was an episode on there too where he has a bluefish that dies, and it's touching on death there too. And I didn't realize it was Mr. Rogers. It was a direct take from that, that same episode that you just mentioned. It just clicked with me there. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, they even made a grave marker in the episode I watched. They had, and what's funny is its name, it didn't really have a name, it was just fish. So they wrote fish on it, and they had a little image of it, and they put a little grave marker there. And I was like, this is a great way to help kids, accept death. So.
Yes. I watched some of the clips him talking about divorce today, like I think you already mentioned,
Yeah.
and just not to get too personal, but having gone through a divorce,
Right.
and of course I don't have children, but it still spoke to me on here he's telling them it's not anybody's fault necessarily. It's not you. It's not this. And I thought how powerful that had to be for kids because I think we can all agree kids believe what they're told. They believe what they
Mhm.
say.
Yep.
I'm struck by how intelligent and how purposeful he was with all of the how and really shouldn't we all be purposeful with the things we say and do? I
Right.
mean, just I'm kind of floored by that.
Yeah, I agree. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is I think we've all agreed that if you are familiar with Mr. Rogers, then you're probably a fan. Like, I don't know of anyone that's not a fan of Mr. Rogers, except Fox News from the 2000s. And you knew I was going to bring this up, Boeing. But
I was hoping you wouldn't, but
you knew I was going to. But
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this.
So it was in a joking manner. I'll give you that. They laughed about it when
Yes.
they said it.
Yeah.
So take it for a grain of salt. They were probably joking, but they
Yes.
did say that part of the problem with today's culture, and this was in the 2000s when they said it, is the kids, the young adults of today's culture, is they grew up with Mr. Rogers, and that he taught them that they're fine with the way they are, that they don't ever have to change anything, and that was a problem. So I actually wanted to bring that up and just dive in a little bit. Is that actually a problem? Like, if you're telling kids that they are completely fine, and again, from the more of the Christian standpoint, could that be a problem?
Yes, if taken in isolation. But that's the way every sin and problem works, is that you take one thing that's true. I think it's a Chesterton quote. You take one piece that's true and you hold that in isolation and ignore all the other truths that also come in context with it. But I think the reason why that's even more limited than what I just said is that the problem is most people need to hear that they're not worthless rather than hearing that they have something wrong with them. Now, obviously, like I said, maybe that's changed a little bit because I think we see a lot in our culture that the lack of acknowledgement of sin has seemed to have grown a lot in the recent past, I would say, to where it may be a little bit different than it was when Mr. Rogers first came on, to where people don't want to admit that they've done anything wrong. But I still think the greater problem more so is that people are more likely to feel worthless and unredeemable rather than feel like that they're completely perfect and they have no flaws. So obviously, yeah, if you think that if you take it completely literally and ignore everything else and say, look, there's nothing wrong with me at all, I don't do anything wrong, I've never lied to anybody, I've never yelled at my family or something like that, like yeah, that's problematic. But I don't think that's the context that it's really in. It's in a context where people feel like they are shamed and can't ever be redeemed.
And that's the problem we see with adults today. I don't want to get too preachy again, but a lot of ministers have made a lot of money telling people that they don't deserve grace, telling people that they don't have any worth, telling people that they need to change, instead of presenting the gospel, the good news, which is, like you said, God meets you where you are. God gets down in the dirt with you. He will go into the pigsty.
Exactly.
Like the prodigal son. And that doesn't mean that everything you do is okay, but it does mean that we accept you where you are. It is not.
And you have worth where you are. Yes.
Right. You have worth. Thank you. And I don't, listen, I have quite a few opinions about Fox News. You can tell by the look on my face, I'm not impressed, but that's neither here nor there. That's a whole other podcast. And you can edit that out if you like or not.
No, it's staying for sure.
But how ridiculous to tell people that was the problem. Yeah. Even if it was said in a joking manner.
Right.
People listen to that nonsense and take it as the gospel. Yeah. It's not.
Yeah. I think what's important is the context of who Mr. Rogers' target audience is. We're talking about probably kids 5 and under, right? I mean, at least elementary school age kids. That's it. That's his primary target audience.
Right.
those kids of that age is not in, I don't think, the mind frame to really understand or know sin or accountability or any of that. So why would you be telling them, you're bad and you're doing this and you're doing, they need to hear that they're worthy. They need to hear that they're loved. They need to hear that the way they are, I accept you and I love you. And if you think about the gospel, that is the first step of the gospel. God is accepting us and loving us the way we are. Jesus Christ is offering that, and then it's the relationship through Jesus Christ that changes us. It's
Right.
not the reverse. We don't have to change to get in the relationship. We have to get in the relationship to change.
Right.
And I think that's important.
That's a nice little slogan. I like that.
You like
was
that?
Good.
That should go on
That
a
was on the
t-shirt.
spot. That should be a t-shirt. Right.
I know I've shared with you all before. I was a youth pastor a long time. I'm still active in our youth ministry, even serving in a senior pastorate. But I cannot tell you the number of times that kids will come in and dad doesn't want anything to do with them for whatever
Mhm.
reason. They live with grandma and grandpa because mom's off doing whatever she wants. Kids think it's their fault. They think they don't have value. And it's easily as bad today as it was 30 years ago, if not worse.
Yeah.
So that Mr. Rogers telling them you have value. I like you for who you are is so vital. And that's what we need to be doing.
Yeah.
Whether you are a pastor or not, you are an ambassador of the gospel.
Yep. We are all priests.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Like you said too, Nate, that it's that one sheet. You know that there are some
Right.
people out there that even if like it's become more of a general problem that we want to ignore sin, there's absolutely individuals out there that have been
Right.
completely broken by being degraded, by being,
Right.
Put down their whole life. That those people absolutely need to hear that they are worthy.
Absolutely. And I think if our society had a Mr. Rogers, specifically in the avenue of social media, it would help greatly with bullying, cyberbullying, and all of those things, and especially
Yeah.
teen suicide, because
Mhm.
it's such a problem, and we just need we need that voice. I pray somebody with the, I guess, the entertainment value that Mr. Rogers had can step up and just be that voice. That's what we need for sure.
I agree.
All right. Any other Mr. Rogers thoughts? 143. Did you all read this? 143.
I don't
143.
think so.
143 pounds is what he stayed primarily his entire adult life, and that's because
okay.
one, yeah, one I, four love, 4 letters, love, you, 3 letters. So 143 is what he tried to stay at his entire adult life. Yeah. So that's a interesting symbolic thing to do, and stay healthy. I guess that's a good healthy weight. maybe a little too skinny for my preference, but
I haven't seen 143 pounds probably since my senior year of high school or earlier.
probably for me, 4th grade, 5th grade.
It's a
I
long
think
way
I was
away.
listed on the high school football thing at 150, and they always add extra weight onto those things. So
Yeah.
it's probably about the same time.
Yep.
I didn't get to see the movie that Tom Hanks played Mr. Rogers in. Did either one of you guys see it?
I did. Yeah. It was good. It was really good.
That's on my list of movies to catch at some point.
There was a second one too, wasn't there? There were 2 that
There's a
came out around
documentary.
about
There's
the
a
same
documentary that came out first.
Okay.
And that was a couple years ago, and that was just a documentary. And then the second one was
Good.
Tom Hanks portraying Fred Rogers. But it was from what was interesting, it was from the site of the journalist who was trying to interview Fred Rogers. And it was weird because his motives, if I'm remembering correctly, his motives was that he just could not believe that Fred Rogers was as good as he thought, as he's portrayed. So this journalist got interested in finding out more of Fred Rogers, really to uncover things. And turns out he's as good as the media says he is. And they become really good friends, and it's just an amazing story. So I would encourage.
That is not a theological statement on the cynicism of man. I don't
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
what
Right.
else is.
That is very true. Okay, good stuff. I had a good feeling that this would be a great topic, and
It's pretty fun. I'm
Yeah.
very glad too that, like I said, that I've mentioned a couple of times, the Daniel Tiger stuff is around because my kids get
Yeah.
to enjoy it, and
Right.
the same type of thing that I got to enjoy. I've tried to get them to watch some original Mr. Rogers, but I guess the television age difference.
Right.
Like, what is this stuff
Yeah.
that you're making me watch?
What is a
Why is
cassette
it so
tape?
blurry?
I read that Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood isn't available for streaming anywhere. Is that right?
I don't know, actually.
You know, like Sesame Street's on
It's-
HBO Max. It's
actually-
owned by Warner Brothers.
Yeah,
This
it's
was a
act-
couple years ago. I don't know if it's like went away, but I know we streamed an episode, unless it was just like
Was it
some
on
bootleg
Amazon
YouTube
Prime?
site that I found. Well, we have Amazon
Now-
Prime, so it could have been.
There is a YouTube channel, and it's called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and I don't know if it's like actually affiliated or if it's just a fan, but they actually do have a lot of the episodes on it, and that's where I
was
watched
curious
it
if that was
tonight.
true.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't looked at any of the streaming, but I'll check it out. I'd like to go back and watch some of the black and white ones, just
Yeah.
some of the old ones to see. But yeah, I guess to close this,
Yeah, good stuff.
it's such a good feeling to know you're alive. It's such a happy feeling you're growing inside. When you wake up ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy new day. It's such a good feeling, very good feeling. The feeling you know that I'll be back when the day is new. And I'll have more ideas for you. And you'll have things you'll want to talk about. I will too. Peace be to you. Have a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you got some enjoyment out of the podcast this week. Remember to check out our website, www.appalachianliturgy.com, and follow us on all of our social medias. If you want an easy way to support us, though, make sure to subscribe to our channels and like our videos on YouTube. Also, join our email list for updates and let us know how we're doing. See you next week, everyone. Appalachian Liturgy Podcast is a JRS Studios production.